Hi folks, Mike again. So I'm working on the Gottlieb haunted house again. I don't know if you remember, I think there's a separate video I had about the one segment staying on for player 3 and 4 display, the H segment. So I'm trying to fix that now. Tracked it back to a bad Z16, I think, on the MPU board. And it's right over here in the top right corner. I clipped out the old one using the micro clippers, and I used the desolder pump that I bought a while ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago, and I just started using it recently. It works great. I'll have to do a review on that. By the time I do the review, it's going to be, that model will be old. But it really does work nice. If you do any kind of board work, you really should get a desolder pump like that. I forgot what I paid for it. If you're going to do a lot of board work, it's well worth the money, especially on these delicate boards that these Gottliebs tend to be. So I don't think these holes, here it is, right over here, hole there, or maybe we'll look at this 5-volt hole, this hole right here, which is pin 14. So the top obviously has the trace, but on the other side, the trace isn't there. So it only hooks up on one side of it. So I think I've always had problems with Gottlieb boards where the traces are much more delicate than whether it's Williams or Bally or Stern. So they're just much more delicate. And what I'm using on this, instead of a regular socket, I took that out and I'm going to put a socket in, is, let's see if I can find them here. And I'm just about out of them. I'll have to order more. I think these are called machine pin sockets. I ordered them a long time ago. And they're just like an individual row, and you have to cut off whatever length you need for each side. The advantage of using these over other types of sockets is that not only can you solder from the back of the board, but you can solder, it sits up high enough where you can get a little bit of solder on the top of the board, which is important on these Gottlieb boards here. So that's what I'm going to do now, is solder these back in, and then I'll test I'll use the multimeter to make sure I have continuity across these lines that you see here. Because once a chip is in, it's going to be difficult to see where they go. So I got it marked down on paper where each one of these lines go out to. I looked on the schematic. So some of them go over here to the Z18 chip on some of these pins. So I've got that written down, and I'll use the multimeter with the diode check, so it'll beep to make sure I have good connection, I've got it soldered correctly. And then I could just do the back of the board over here. I could see these easily enough and see where they go to test them out and make sure it's making good connection. Alright, we'll see how it works. The other thing I bought for this, actually I bought several, is the NVRAM to replace this 5101. But I have not had any problems with it, so like I said, these boards are so delicate, I'm not going to bother replacing it until I have a problem with it. I'm afraid of screwing up some of the traces on here. Alright, the other thing to mention, when using these machine pin sockets, like I said, they come in individual rows, and you have to cut off to the right length. Like this is a 14 pin, so I cut a 7 pin length and then another 7 pin length, and I'm using one of my old 14 pin IC chips to hold these straight, and then I can slip it into the board and solder it on so it's straight, and then I'll put the correct chip in there and it should go in nice and easy. The other thing too is when I was cutting this to the right length, the one pin on the, this is the one pin on the end here broke off, and it ended up being a 6 pin on this side. This one was all by itself broken off. So I used this glue. It came across on one of the websites. You know, it was one of those advertisement websites that popped up, Bondic. And what it does is it comes out in a thick liquid form, pinpoint, and I put a pinpoint on here. You know, I put the single pin up against the other 6 and held it tight and used this Bondit here, and it's got a little pinpoint, and you squeeze the tube gently and the liquid comes out. I only used 1 drop. There it is, right there. And then it uses ultraviolet light, and it comes with this ultraviolet light here, and you just pass it over for like 30 seconds. You hold it over that little drop and it cures it hard. And I think it's great for these types of applications. It doesn't do any good to put the glue in between 2 things. For example, if I want to glue 2 things together like this, it doesn't do any good to put the glue here because the ultraviolet light can't get in there. But if you're looking to join 2 things together, and you want to put the glue on the top, then you can run your ultraviolet light over it to harden it up. And it's nice because it only takes 30 seconds and it hardens up nicely. And now that pin is on there good, and it won't come off. And you see it's lined up nicely. All right, I'm going to try and solder that in and see what happens. Okay, finished putting in the chip, the socket, and it is this one right here. Looks like it came out pretty good. I used the multimeter on the diode test, and everything seems to be good. I just have to replace this chip because this was just a dummy chip to get everything lined up. Take this out and put in a I think I have to check the schematic. I think it's 7404, and it's ready to go. Just a couple of things to always point out. I always wear safety glasses because this solder could splash up in your face anytime, so I always wear safety glasses doing this. And that's about it. We'll try the machine and see how it works. Okay, looks like it was a success. You'll see the numbers strobing, and that's just because of the camera. In person, it's not strobing around. It actually looks fine. But as you can see, the single segment, H segment that was stuck on players 3 and 4 is now gone. I replaced the 7404 chip with a socket and a 74 LS04, and looking good. Now let's see if we can. Oh, I got no credits. Let's see if it starts up all right. Put a couple of credits on. Two. camera work. Okay. Player 4 is working too. Up. So everything seems to work. Displays are working nicely. So yeah, I replaced a 7404 chip with a 74 LS04 and it's working fine. So, how did I figure out it was the Z16 chip on the CPU or MPU board? Well, first, in the schematics for Haunted House, the manual schematics, 6-digit display. We see right here, this was the segment that was locked on for player 3 and 4, and that's called the H segment. See it right here? So what I did was I followed it from here and Z1 chip, which is mounted on the display driver board. I knew that wasn't the problem, or I really didn't think that would be the problem because it's on both player 3 and 4, so it had to be something that was common to both of them. So it's unlikely that the chip on both of those displays were bad. So if we look here, A4J1, and then we have to find out where, here it is. A4J1 is the bottom of the connector over, let's see here, this is A4J1 connector. So we've got to find out what feeds into this display. So okay, we're back on the display area again. So it said here, segment H, which was locked on, A4J1. So now we look here, we know it's display 4 and display 3, what we're having problems with on segment H. So here is H, that comes up over here on this line. Player 3 comes up on this line. So they're both sharing the same line. And you notice player 1 and player 2 do not. It's just player 3 and player 4 on this line for segment H. That comes over, comes down, and comes in over here, segment H. And it says here from A1 control board, and it's pin 16. So now we go back. So that's how I really knew it was from the A1 control board, the MPU or CPU board. And it was pin 16. So now we look for A1J2. There's H, but that's pin 8. We don't want that one. That's player 1 and player 2 probably. And here, pin 16H. So now we pick it up again. And we see, comes up, pin 10 on Z16 7404 chip. So what I did was, at this point, I hooked up the multimeter. Black goes to ground, and the red I put on pin 10, and I put it on, I think my meter goes down to, for DC, 2 volts, 20 volts, 200 volts DC. Well, 2 volts is too low, because I know this is 5 volts coming in DC, so I put it on 20 volts on the meter dial. And then I turned the game on, and I could see this was always getting voltage out of this pin on the 7404 chip, pin 10. So that's why this segment is always being locked on. So then, if you look here, pin 11, let's see, pin 11 is what feeds into this chip, and the output is pin 10. So the black wire is still on ground on my multimeter. I put the red wire on here and measured the voltage, and I compared it to, well, it's hard to tell, but that's pin 13, because I knew this one was working fine. This is also the H segment, but it's for the other displays, not display 3 and 4. And I compared pin 13 input to pin 11, and I noticed that was the same. So that means what's going into the chip is fine, but what's coming out was not. So that told me that this chip was bad. So that's how I found out to replace this one chip. So that's when I unsoldered the chip and put the socket in and put a new 74 LSO4 in, and it's working fine. So anyway, that's how I read the schematic to track back the problem. That's how I always do it, to track back problems with these either the solid state or the electronic, the solid state or the electromechanical machines. All right, thank you very much.